The Life and Times survey is an annual survey which began in 1998, and the whole aim of the survey is to monitor the attitudes and behaviour of people living in Northern Ireland, obviously in an environment that is moving very quickly, both socially and politically, or sometimes isn't moving very quickly, socially and politically. It's important to have some kind of vehicle that we can record the attitudes of people living here and find out what they think about the main social issues of the day. And in that way, we're able to have some kind of public record of opinions over time. And leading into that, actually the Life and Times survey is a descendant of another survey, which was the Northern Ireland Social Attitude Survey, which ran from 1989 to 1996. And in fact, some of the questions and themes that were asked in the Northern Ireland Social Attitude Survey have been repeated in the Life and Times survey. And in fact, informal caring, which we're going to discuss today, is one of those themes. The survey consists of a set of modules, different themes each year. And in 2006, we had a wide range of issues which we think reflect the concerns of people today. It's a random sample survey of adults aged 18 years and over, and we sampled 1,230 people living in Northern Ireland. So we have their attitudes to a wide range of issues ranging from community relations, political attitudes, satisfaction with the National Health Service, informal carers, minority ethnic people and migrant workers. So you can see that these are issues that affect us all or will probably affect us at some stage in our lives. So on the website, we have the URL up there, and all this information will be in your packs as well. Available from this morning, from 11:30 this morning, on the Life and Times website, you can find the questionnaires that were used in the 2006 survey and in all the range of surveys that we've had. The technical reports, giving background and sampling information for those of you who are more statistically minded. We have the publications, we have about 50 publications, mostly coming from the Life and Times survey. And we also have tables of results for all 300 questions of the survey. And you can see frequency tables, and you can see responses broken down by age, gender and religion. If you're really interested in doing some secondary analysis yourself, you can download the data in SPSS protocol file format as well to undertake your own analysis. And you can also find details of a helpline to give you information on technical issues. And that helpline will come to me, and I've just realised I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Paula Devine, and I'm one of the coordinators of the Life and Times survey, and I'm based in Sociology and Greens. So if you contact the helpline, again. So I'd just like to say a word of thanks, not only to Eileen, who the Life and Times team have worked with a lot in the past, but also to the range of funders for the survey, in particular to the Office of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, who have been very supportive of the survey over the years. And of course, obviously, I want to say a word of thanks to respondents of the survey, who we couldn't have the survey, we didn't have them. I don't know if any of you have ever been involved with it, but if you are, thank you very much. So today, Eileen Evason is going to talk about informal caring. And we're going to look at changes in caring between 1994 and 2006. And in fact, she's going to use data from both the 2006 Life and Times survey, but also the 1994 Social Attitude Survey. So with these two surveys, having asked the same module of questions over time, we're able to see, has there been any change in the experiences and attitudes of people. I'd also just like to reiterate that this is a random sample of the population aged 18 and over living in Northern Ireland. It's not a specific sample of people who are carers. The idea is to get the experiences and attitudes of the wide range of a representative sample. So say it's not just, we didn't just focus on carers in particular. So I'd just like to introduce Eileen, Professor Eileen Evason, Professor of Social Administration at the University of Ulster. She's also an Equality Commissioner, a broadcaster. I think many of you will have heard her on your behalf on a Saturday morning. Also Chair of the Standards Committee in Northern Ireland, and also member of the Health and Social Care Trust in Belfast. So the format of this seminar is that Eileen will talk for about 20-25 minutes, and then there will be discussion until 1 o'clock. We will then have light lunch, hopefully served outside, where we can continue the discussion and meet and talk. So, thank you. I'm going to sit over here and press the buttons.
Okay. Well, first of all, can I thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure to see so much interest in the subject, and also a pleasure to see so many familiar faces from the past. Many of you really have not made sufficient use of the escape committee from the university. Before moving on to the actual data, I think I'd like to make 3 observations. First of all, I'm grateful to Paula for emphasising that this is a proper representative survey of adults in Northern Ireland. I crossed swords with a priest on radio foil earlier today. I had to pull him up swords on this very point. More seriously, perhaps, I think when one's thinking about caring, and this came up in a thing I was doing with Linda McCauley the other week, when one's thinking about caring, it's very easy to look at the stats and say, well, right, informal care for relatives and so on is a minority activity. It's a significant activity, but it's a minority activity. That's how many people would look at it. In fact, when you think about it, informal caring ricochets across our society. I mean, first of all, of course, we have the significant minority of adults who are actually carers. Alongside those, of course, we have the people who are actually in need of care. And then alongside those, there will be all sorts of people who are playing supportive roles. So, for example, if you have a typical situation, wife is looking after elderly mother, then she will perhaps need more help from her husband and from other relatives. So very often carers will have support from other relatives, from their partners, and indeed these days perhaps employers as a result of the rights that carers have. So it is not, as I say, a minority but significant activity. It is something that permeates adult society in many ways. I think the other observation to make is that we've been producing data generally on a snapshot basis, and therefore it's really good to have the opportunity to sort of look at 2 sets of data and say, right, that was then 1994, this is now 2006-07, what is the situation, what has changed, is caring a static, unchanging kind of activity? So that's what we'll be looking at. Looking across the data, as I say, we will have discussion on this because I quite welcome people's ideas. Looking across the data, when I first got it, I thought, well, something is going on here, but I'm not entirely sure what it is or why it's happening. So we've ended up in a situation whereby we can surmise that various changes in our society are impacting on caring, but we would probably need to do more research, great research, it's like a recommendation like that. We would need more research to look at that properly. I mean, I did try to do it, but when we were drilling down, the numbers got silly and there was no point. So I do think that there's a further area of research here to see what is going on. Now, the possibility that something's happening comes out very clearly in the first table. And what this shows is that in 2006, on top of running a household, earning a living and all the rest of it, taking foreign holidays, the other things people do these days, in 2006 we had 23% of adults in Northern Ireland reporting that they were carers. However, when you look at it, or if you look further within the table, we can see that 2 things are going on. First of all, the proportion of people who were carers in 2006 is a bit down from the number in 1994. We've got a bit of a drop. Secondly, and quite interesting when we look within the tables, we can see that carers are now less likely than they were in 1994 to be caring for somebody in another household. The proportion of carers looking after somebody in the same household has doubled. Now, this latter point suggests to me that something's going on. I mean, if we just took the 26% and the 23%, we could say, oh, that's just a bit of a statistical blip. But it's when we look within it and we see that shifting pattern with regard to caring within a household and in another household, we start to think, well, maybe something else is actually going on, and we haven't just messed up the figures or lost something in the computer. Something similar also seems to be happening when we look at figure 1. Now, we've always known that a minority of carers were caring for more than one person, caring for 2, 3 or more people. Indeed, when I first did research on this, I think I looked at one questionnaire, and as far as I could make out, one woman was caring for 5 people. And I said, oh, carer of the year, can we run out and find this woman? So it was quite, there was, from the start, an indication that a number of people were actually not just caring for one person, but for caring for 2 or 3. Again, however, when we look at this figure, what we have is, yes, a minority of people are caring for 2 or more people, but here again we can see a drop in the number of people, the number of carers who are looking after 2 or more people in another household. So in 1994 we had 25%. They were looking after somebody in another household. That drops in 2006, whereas the within the household figure drops slightly. So again, there's something interesting. As I sort of went through all of this, I kept getting this image, that you get from the old cowboy films, of the sort of circle of wagons. And the wagons get circled, and you keep everybody else out, or particularly the Indians out. I was just thinking that may not be entirely appropriate. At least pass over that. Anyway, what I'm trying to get at here in a rather inelegant manner is just that there is a possibility that what's going on is a redrawing of the boundaries of informal care. The boundaries of care are being pulled back. A lot of people are still doing a lot of caring, but it's more concentrated. It's less distributed across society. And this comes out very clearly if we look at Table 2. Now, Table 2 looks at the direction of caring, but that is who is being cared for. Now, to go back into the history of all of this, it should be noted that the debate around informal care started in the 1980s. The view was that there were networks of carers. I remember having rows with colleagues about it. The view was that there were networks of carers existing in the community, friends, neighbours, relatives, milkmen, all ready to care for anybody and everybody who crossed their paths. So that was the theory, these networks existed. And government was very, very keen on this theory because, of course, if there were these networks in the community, what you could do was pull back health and social services. So whoopee, when this theory came out in the early 80s, some politicians were extremely pleased indeed. We argued at the time that this was nonsense, and we said that typically informal care was family care, often provided by one person, and therefore that carers were a group in need of support, rather than a resource that the government could exploit. So we got that case across quite well. But if we look at this table, what it's actually showing is that today, to a greater extent than ever, informal care is family care. By and large, if you look at that table, it's caring for, well, typically a parent, but I chuck the in-laws in there just for the sake of tidiness. Parents, children with disabilities, spouse and partner. And what's interesting, and that's pretty well it. What's interesting is the way in which help for another relative who is outside the immediate family circle has very much diminished, and help to friends and neighbours has very much reduced as well. Now, there never was that much help to friends and neighbours, but there was much more help, as you can see, to another relative. So as I say, we're coming down to informal care, effectively meaning care of somebody who is part of your immediate family circle. By 2006, 80% of informal care, parent care, spouse care, care of a child with disability, compared with 56% of the total amount of care given in 1994. So again, you can see the sort of wagons being sort of pulled in. So there's a number of questions already to which we can return. Why is this happening? Are there gaps in care opening up and the rest of it? But if we just leave aside those issues, if we move on to Table 3, what we can see in Table 3 is a fairly familiar gender split. We can see that women are still more likely to be carers. But again, something seems to be happening. First of all, women slightly less likely to report caring responsibilities, and amongst men that's gone down from 22% to 17%. So it fits in the overall pattern suggested by the first table that yes, it looks like we've got a decline, a slight decline, in the proportion of adults who are caring in Northern Ireland. Similarly, if we take table 4, we can see an age profile change in carers. Now, with regard to age, I mean, caring never conformed to this sort of stereotype of it's the young, sort of assisting the very elderly. Caring always involved a lot of young elderly people looking after very elderly people. And that's, you know, as we always discuss when we reach this point in the debate. I mean, that's to do with the way in which the population is stringing out demographically. And we started to notice this process in the 60s and 70s. As I always say, I started my professional career as a medical social worker. And, you know, the elderly person up on the ward, I'd say, right, see the parents, I'll see the children. Well, elderly person up on the ward is in her 80s, children are going to be in their 60s. And having walking sticks and not looking terribly lively themselves. So the notion that the people who were providing informal care were the young and the sprightly never really stood up. But nevertheless, there was a presence of younger people, younger adults within the caring population. Again, what we can see is, if we look at the 18 to 34-year-old group, 29% of carers fitting into that in 1994, that's gone down to 20%. And then we've got a shift towards caring being done by the older age groups. So we've got 31% of our carers now in 2006 over 55. So again, there's something interesting and strange going on there. If we take table 5, table 5 deals with the hours people spend caring. Now, this is quite important. What you can actually see here is a very sharp drop in the proportion of people providing care for a limited number of hours per week. It's gone down quite dramatically. So 1994, we had 57% of carers say they cared for less than 10 hours a week. That's gone down to 40%. 10 to 29 is down a bit. And then this big shift upwards. So in 1994, we only had 13% of carers saying that they cared for 30 hours plus, which is effectively a full-time job. That's gone up more than doubled to 31% in 2006. And quite often when we talk about 30 hours plus, we're actually talking about full-time across the week. So what we're beginning to see here is that we've got fewer carers, but the carers we've got are providing a more intensive form of care. Again, this comes out if we move on to table 6. This looks at days per week spent caring. Again, we can see this very sharp drop in the number of people who report that they provide care for 1 or 2 days a week. So in 1994, over a third of carers said, well, I just help for 1 or 2 days a week. That drops down to 22%. Again, the 3-4 days figure has gone down to 15%. And then we've got 62% of carers now saying that they're caring 5, 6, 7 days a week. That's entirely predictable, given that increasingly it's people who are very close to you, or close to carers who are being looked after. Okay, and then if we look at table 7, this is as people say, a busy table. But if you struggle with it, what I think it is showing is that amongst men and women, the proportion giving limited care under 10 hours a week has dropped sharply amongst men, dropped to a degree amongst women. 10 to 29 hours, it's gone up a bit amongst, it's gone down slightly amongst males, and gone down slightly amongst females. It's the 30 hours plus that's the issue, because there, the key figure is the one right at the end, 34%. We're now talking about caring, not just being done by women, but in more than a third of the cases, it is more than a full-time job. So that makes carers a very different sort of group to what we've been thinking about in the past. And this comes out graphically in Table 8. It's sharper again, men dropping from 43 to 28 with regard to providing care 1 to 2 days a week, 21 to 14, 3, 4, 37 to 58, saying it's a 5-day, it's a full week, it's a cost-a-week job. And then again, right at the far end, we've got 2/3 of women saying that basically it's day in, day out. So that takes us through the sort of basic data on caring. And that was, I mean, we looked at quite a lot of different variables and tried to shift all sorts of things around. But basically that was the thing that came out. That was the most important thing. As I say, we did try to sort of drill down a bit more, but then we got into silly numbers when we were trying to sort of cross tab X with Y or whatever. But nevertheless, that does seem to me to be indicative that something significant is happening and indicative of a need to do further research, because it does suggest to me that if caring has changed, then clearly the kind of support that carers need has got to change with it. And finally, and more broadly, we can also see something of a shift in attitudes. Table 9 presents the data related to who should provide care for elderly people. And now, well, we can see in 1994, I mean, there was a fairly strong view that it was a matter for public services for the government. But by 2006, that's gone up to nearly 3/4 of the adult population. So 3/4 of the adult population thinks that support for the elderly, care for the elderly, should be done via public services. Interestingly, notions of family duty and responsibility aren't as visible as one might have expected. In Northern Ireland in 1994, 28%, and we were surprised that it was as low as that. The 28% thought it was primarily a matter for relatives. That sunk down to 19%. And really, friends, voluntary organisations and other things are nowhere. People just don't see that friends and neighbours and voluntary organisations, the sort of stalwarts of the old sort of informal welfare networks, have gone. So on the basis of all of that, what can we conclude? First of all, as I say, I think the boundary of care, of informal care, is being more tightly drawn. What we've got, fewer people caring. I'm sorry this isn't on an overhead, but it got lost somewhere between my computer and Paula's, as things I want to do. So as I say, it looks like the boundary of informal care is being pulled back. It's being more tightly drawn. We've got fewer people caring, but they are doing more. Why is this happening? Again, I think it's the main subject for discussion. When I was thinking about this, as I was looking at the stuff, clearly over the last 10 years, Northern Ireland has changed in a lot of ways. First of all, we've had the expansion of employment opportunities. So people are more likely to be out at work rather than out of work, which used to be the case. Alongside the expansion of employment opportunities, we've also had the deregulation of the labour market. That means that people who are in work are more likely to be working on social hours, flexible hours, and all the rest of it. So both of those things obviously diminish people's capacity to do unpaid work. For example, you've got a situation where maybe there's a niece and she's on her way to work, but she always calls in an elderly aunt to make sure the aunt gets her breakfast and whatnot. And then the employer says, well, actually, no, I want you to come in 2 hours earlier. In all sorts of ways, when people don't have as much control as perhaps they used to over the hours they worked or working more regular on social hours, there are issues. So I think, first of all, we have to think about the impact of more economic, more employment opportunities in Northern Ireland, but also the fact that people are working longer hours, they're working on social hours. A second massive change that we've seen in Northern Ireland relates, of course, to housing. In effect, and this affects young people particularly, we've seen this massive growth in house prices, people scrambling desperate to get on the property ladder, and these days, of course, it takes 2 salaries to pay for the mortgage. And I was sort of wondering when I was looking at the dropping number of people in the younger age group who are caring, is this an issue? Is it they're not caring anymore, they're not caring, but they aren't able to care anymore because both of them have to go to work. One of the places I frequent actually is the David Lloyd Leisure Centre. And I've noticed sitting in the sauna during the weekdays, weekday mornings, you can sort of listen in on a whole lot of conversations. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's just what I'm thinking about. And there's kind of a whole issue that's going on about, because we're mainly oldies at that time of the day, you know, the oldies are starting to say, well, the daughter's just had the baby and she wants me to look after the baby because she's got to go back to work because they need to pay the mortgage, and I feel like I've done my bit and I'm not sure I want to look after them. So there are all these things, we covered it in a good deal of the work on grandparenting, but there are all these things going on between the generations of younger people are looking to grandparents and parents to provide childcare. And young people who are looking for childcare have less time themselves to assist others. So we're getting into a horrible sort of tangle between the generations, an expectation between the generations. So I think that's an issue as well. And housing and employment are playing a part. The other thing that we've seen over the last 10 years is welfare to work. In other words, the assumption that everybody on benefit, barring the terminally ill, and I'm not sure how long they'll be exempt, ought to be got off benefit and into paid employment. Now, that means that again is squeezing out a capacity to care that we used to have. Going back to the work that I did with Gillian for many years on lone parents, I just got terribly frustrated when people said to me, why don't they go out to work? Because I thought, well, they're looking after children. A lone parent, they first of all look after children in the home. Secondly, they're quite often looking after a relative with disability. And thirdly, of course, they're contributing to their community groups. So they were doing all of this work, but the problem with it is that increasingly in our society, it's unpaid work is not recognised and not valued. So I am wondering, I mean, certainly, you know, the stats could be different next year, who knows? But I am sort of wondering if the kind of society that we're creating is squeezing away, squeezing out people's capacity to do all sorts of things that are terribly important, but aren't paid, aren't recognised, and Gordon Brown has clearly never heard of them. So there are all those possibilities if we think about the implications for health and social services. First of all, as I say, it means that, I mean, social services have got to be much more alert to the growing needs of carers. If carers increasingly are doing more, then they're more likely to get run down, then they're more likely to say they need support. Now, carers can, of course, under the community care legislation, ask for assessment of their needs, as well as the needs of the person with disability. And I think it's very important that the health trusts put efforts into supporting carers. And can I just voice an expression of frustration? I spent 6 years as a non-executive director with South and East Belfast Health and Social Services Trust. And every year we were enraged at the way in which we got more responsibilities and we didn't get the money. And the one thing where we kept getting responsibilities was carers. Well, I'd sit this, and I think the Minister was saying £200,000 at least 6 times over, as these ones are likely to do. No doubt I find exactly the same problem with largely the Belfast Trust. So there are issues about politicians coming out and saying, you know, we're very concerned about care as well. What we need is for politicians to make sure that the trusts get the resources that they need to implement the responsibilities that we have. Because we were very strong on doing carers assessments of their needs, but then you wondered if there was much point if we couldn't really provide the services. So I think there's a whole issue there about sort of how services respond. And then I think there are questions about, right, does this pattern mean that gaps in care in the community are going to open up? Because if people are pulling back and saying, right, I'll care for my immediate family, but I'm not going over the hedge beyond that, what happens to people with need who are over the hedge and beyond that? And that, I think, is a consideration. So, on the whole, therefore, as I said at the start, I think something interesting is happening, but I'm having to speculate on exactly what it is. But I do think there's an area for discussion here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I think the lesson is, next time you're sitting in the sauna, just be careful what you say or you'll end up being quoted in somebody's seminar. Having said that, if we could get some research funding for us to hang about in leisure centres all day, I think we could try and make a point.
The other place is the stair, and then you're out for the cigarettes.
That means we have to take up smoking then.
Absolutely.
Okay, right, well, leading quickly on to that, thank you very much for that, Eileen. We have now about another 20 minutes for discussion, so we very much welcome your thoughts or questions leading on from what Eileen's talked about. I'd just like to say that the fieldwork for this survey actually only finished 3 months ago, so Eileen has worked very quickly with Katrina Lloyd, my colleague, to produce these statistics, and these are just a very small taster of the questions that we asked to do with caring. There's a lot of other questions that haven't been analysed for this seminar. So if you go into the website, you'll find there's a lot more information there as well. So if anybody would like to contribute to this, when you tell us your name and where you're from, Gillian, when you ask the question. Thank you.
Eileen Robinson, work with ARK at the University of Ulster. Eileen, thank you very much. I always enjoy hearing you speak, so thanks for contributing yet again to the debate on caring in Northern Ireland. In terms of the profile of the people who are actually caring, from what you're saying, it is now very unlikely that people who are in paid employment are going to be able to provide the volume of care that's being required. But did you actually look to see the profile of the carers? So we know there were more men.
Yes, we did, and that's when the numbers got silly.
Right. But mostly they're not working.
It was quite difficult because I was saying, right, let's look at male carers who are working, male carers, not female carers, and the numbers just got too small.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difficulty with it. I mean, I think it would almost need qualitative work. I mean, I think we're at the stage where maybe if we did sort of focus groups exercises, we could get this, but it wasn't coming out in the stats, but then we were just looking at handfuls of people. Because you see, if you start off with 2,000 people, but you end up with about 200 carers, and then you drill down how many men and women you've got, and then you drill down into our unpaid employment, and it just isn't really enough.
Deirdre in the University of Ulster McGee. I mean, I was just wondering, probably you've already answered this in terms of the figures. Could you say anything about the rural-urban divide?
We didn't look at it from that perspective. There's always an issue of how you actually do that analysis, and presumably you could.
Yeah, within the survey we asked people
You could do that.
1 of 5 counties that we live in that could be divided into, rated from a small village or in the countryside to whatever, but we haven't done that analysis. As I say, there's so many questions within the survey we just haven't had time to analyse.
But that could be one. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. We'll be working on that for the next
I'll come
time.
back to you.
Or the data's there to download if anybody wants to look at that themselves.
Yeah, I mean, there are quite clearly all sorts of issues around the rural divide, because we're now so deeply into difficulties in Northern Ireland about the delivery of health and social services to the rural areas. And in fact, I'm now getting to the point where I think almost sort of, that's at one end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum, we're reaching the point with, say, subspecialties, where Northern Ireland isn't big enough as such, and therefore we'll have to get into partnerships with, or bodies like the Trust in Liverpool and whatever, because we just don't generate sufficient people with certain kinds of conditions. But certainly there's an issue to do with carers in the middle of all that.
Sorry, just in the back of that, I just want to ask as well. The politicians have more or less said that there will be free personal care going down the road that Scotland went in 2010. What do you think the likely impact of that would be, or do you think that's likely at all?
Well, it doesn't look like it if Peter Robinson has his way.
Yeah.
And I think there are issues about people in the assembly saying we want such and such, and then the people on the person might not be entirely happy about it. Obviously, I would very much like to see free personal care. I mean, I've never known an issue that caused as much aggro over the last 10 or 15 years as people having to sell their houses to pay for nursing homes. And certainly in the trust, I mean, I used to go in and discuss cases with the Director of Finance, and just the hassle that we had from relatives, and at one point a whole clutch of missionaries came home to Northern Ireland, and somehow or other there was a question as to whether or not we should take their assets into account. Where are these missionaries coming from? But anyway, leaving that aside, I mean, obviously I'd like to see the mess sorted out, and that is to just say, right, for you, personal care. It's important to remember that in Scotland, one of the things that's happened actually is that, okay, you get the care, it's free, but you wait longer for it. So, you know, unless you have a very substantial increase in resources, you're not much further forward, because you're saying to somebody, right, well, you know, you can have free care, you know, you need nursing home, you can have free care, personal care as well as the assistance with nursing care that there is, but you're going to have to wait for it for 7 or 8 months. On the other hand, if you want it really now, you can pay. So you might end up with exactly the sort of division you see with regard to hospital care. You know, you can have it now if you want to pay, or you can wait for 3 or 4 months. So it could be trickier than it sounds.
Carrick University of Ulster. I was wondering, knowing nothing really about this area, that if the number of carers is going down, is the number of proportion of elderly in the population going up? In which case this drop could be more significant than it just looks in the figures here.
Well, that is actually the point I was making, because you would expect the number of people, the proportion of people caring to go up, given that we're an ageing population.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, to go back into other work that we've done, I mean, just saying we're an ageing population is not terribly helpful, because people in their 60s and 70s are a lot fitter and healthier than they used to be. So, you know, not everybody over 60 is going around on a Zimmer frame, as one of us in this room would probably attest to. But, so I mean, so I did have a think about that, I thought that's odd. But it was when I was looking at the other stuff that I thought, hang on, yes, there may well be a growing need for care, but what's going on is when you look at actual carers rather than the need for care, then they are clearly pulling back, or it looks as though they're pulling back. And that's where we get into the discussion of, is there a gap in care opening up? Because if we have got a growing number of people in the older age groups, all right, they're not all going to need care, but there is an issue about, will we have more people in the older age groups who need care who don't have immediate families? And that's the problem. Especially with sort of trends in, you know, divorce and marriage breakdown and all this stuff.
Laura Pringle, Queen's University. You mentioned the problem of housing. Do you think there's any significance in the fact that there are more immediate family members caring, because children now literally can't necessarily afford to leave the family home, and so they are on hand and they are perforce caring?
Because I mean the ones that the parents can't get rid of, can't get married off, can't get out of the place at all. I mean they're kind of the 20 to 35 age group, and it's amongst that group that we've actually seen caring go down. So it's not as if they're staying on and on and on and never leaving the nest and doing something useful along the way. So no, it seems to me that it is clearly that I mean I thought about 20 to 35 group, what's special about them? Why would they sort of start to move out of caring, because it seems like they are? And housing was just one thing I thought of, because certainly if you're in your late 20s now and you're trying to buy a house, you're a married couple, I mean both of you need to work. But I mean it may be something else altogether. I mean, it may be just young people are more sensitive these days or something, I've no idea. But as I say, I have a suspicion that the housing market must be doing something to do this.
Or it could be that their parents are not needing help till later on, so it could be in their next,
Could be.
you know,
That's
that
the
the
point.
gap
Yeah, that's a
between,
good point actually. Yeah.
But it could also be that they're paying a mortgage and childcare, and both of those are rising, and if they don't have their parents to do that childcare, that is a great deal of cost.
So there's a question at the very back, and then
Yeah. Do you have any information on under 18s with carers?
No,
No.
this was the
this was the adult lifetime
Yeah.
salary, so it's 18 plus, but directors, I think, decided we did ask a few questions
Yeah,
about
we did.
caring.
We did ask last year in Young Life and Times, which is a survey of 16-year-olds, and we found that about 25% cared for others, and it was actually more males who cared for people who lived not in the same house. of units caring for people who lived in the same house. But we didn't ask who they cared for. We didn't ask what exactly they did. But we will ask this year in 2007 those two questions. So interesting to compare.
Sorry, yeah.
George Kennan from Ulster at Jordanstown. I think what you're saying is that caring needs to be valued more explicitly. Because of the way things are changing, that becomes more clear. But then the question is how? Do you have any ideas as to how the caring responsibilities ought to be recognised either in cash or in tax or in some non-monetary way? What way do you think we might have some
Well, I
solutions?
think that, you're dealing with two sets of things there. I mean, the first thing is measures that would relate to carers as such. And
Yes.
you could think of a few things that could be done which would say to carers, actually, we do recognise you're doing all of this and it's very important and it saves health and social services billions a year. and all the rest of it.
Thank you.
I mean, to take a very simple example, if we take the carers allowance, it's only £47 a week. Therefore, a lot of carers are getting some, like a fifth of the minimum wage, in essence, on an hourly basis. So you could increase the carers allowance, but actually beyond that, one of the things that annoys carers enormously is something called the overlapping benefits regulations. Now, these are the regulations which date from 1979, and they list a number of benefits. And the problem is you can't get more than one of them. So I get a lot of people coming to me and they've just hit 60, with a woman who's just hit 60, just become entitled to her state pension. She's a carer. She's been getting the carer's allowance, and now all of a sudden she realises she's going to lose it. So they're saying, well, look, we are still caring. What is it we cared last week, we'll care next week. So why am I not entitled? Because they say, like, for the state pension, I paid my tax and my national insurance, and you don't get it otherwise. So they're getting the pension because they paid the national insurance. They're getting the carer's allowance because they're caring. But somehow or other, the government has the idea that they should get both. Now, we could just simply say, if you're a carer, you get the carer's allowance. Because the conditions that you have to get through before all of that are quite steep. But certainly if you're, and then of course we have this funny old thing where we sort of say, oh, well, you can't have the carer's allowance, but then you're officially stamped as a carer, so that you can get more generously treated by means-tested benefits, which is a shambles and don't go there. So I think, you could, in terms of social security, I think we can make improvements. In terms of social services and support, we could make improvements. But I don't think, as I said, there's another sort of broader measures, and that is we have to address this idea that everybody ought to be out there doing paid work for 45 hours a week. I mean, I think we're creating an extremely unhealthy society. Now, that's not to say that women shouldn't work, or to say that men shouldn't work for that matter. It's to say that government keeps trying to construct family-friendly policies. You can't graft a family-friendly policy onto a structure that is human unfriendly. And that is the difficulty we face, is trying to move that back. So, I mean, in the Equality Commission, there's always this difficulty that we have. Well, we go out and we argue for women with children. Well, why not women with, why shouldn't women who are caring for elderly relatives have exactly the same rights? And then you run into the backlash of people who don't have children or don't have elderly relatives, but might have 3 or 4 hamsters to whom they're utterly devoted. I don't see why they should never have Christmas to feed them or play with them or whatever. But there is an issue that nobody should be working so many hours that a lot of people are working these days. So it's kind of, we can do things specifically for carers, but we also have to say we've got to move towards a society where people can do unpaid work because there's a lot that needs to be done. And that means challenge. I mean, basically what we're talking about is challenging neoliberal economics which have dominated the UK and the United States for the last 20 or 30 years. But it's very interesting to see the way in which the Europeans, who are repeatedly told they've got it wrong and don't know what they're doing, show a distinct reluctance to follow us.
I mean, it is very complex as you presented it, but what I'm wondering about is in terms of the care gap, so if we're more likely to only care for our immediate family circle, then those people who don't have that sort of immediate family circle, either because their family are living in other parts of the world or they're not fit or they just don't have a wider extended family, is it likely that for those people who need care in due course, that they're the people who will more have to go into nursing homes and more likely to sell their homes? And so is there sort of an issue of inequality there because, you know,
Well,
people without
certainly,
those
if
families
we-
or people who can care would be discriminated against
I mean,
in some way?
if we go back and look at it, in fact, health and social care services have always been concentrated on those who lack other resources and support. So they've always been there to a disproportionate extent. What I'm saying is it may be that we're going to have an expansion of such people because the informal care is being pulled back. And that has all sorts of implications for health and social services. Because the trend in health and social services over the last 10, 15 years they've been pulling back as well. I mean, everybody's pulling back is like pensions, nobody wants to really get involved in it. But certainly if you look at the data that came out last week on social care in England and Wales, the local authorities are now caring for fewer people, assisting fewer people than they did 10 years ago. Now, why is that? They're short of resources, so they're concentrating on those in most need. So, you know, there are 4 categories of need: limited need, moderate need, then it goes up to severe or whatever. And they're talking about, well, you only get help if you get into the top grade. So there's that kind of problem of local authorities are pulling back. I hope we won't do that in Northern Ireland. Local authorities are pulling back, and it's then going to collide with this issue of perhaps an increase in the number of people who actually fall into the category of having very limited other support. So we could all be here in another seminar in 10 years' time saying, gosh, you're right. I mean, I think in Northern Ireland, actually, we all know about everything. But I do think that in Northern Ireland, with the new structure that we've got in health and social care, we do actually have an opportunity to try and tackle these things, because for the first time we have the chance to sort of find out and try to develop a really integrated service. And certainly all the discussions that I've been involved in, not so over the past month or so, it seems to me that, for example, that in Belfast Trust and I think the others, we're talking an awful lot about how do we keep people out of hospitals, how do we keep people out of A&E, how do we support people more effectively in the community, and that's the kind of job we have to do. And I think we've more of a chance of being able to do that in Northern Ireland, because now we can look across the piece. So in Belfast, we're not struggling as we used to be, like, wouldn't it be wonderful if the city would do such and such, because then we could do something else, and we don't have to think in those terms at all. So we can now look across the piece of the service, even though there is an argument to the effect that it's a monster. We shall see.
Francis Murphy from the Ballymena Family Support Group. I apologise for being late.
You're okay, you just came at the end, so you're quite right.
I've no doubt you're right. The start off by saying, I've no doubt you're right. You won't have to wait 10 years. I work with the families of addicts and alcoholics, and they represent some of the most stigmatised groups who come seeking help. We've found over the last 5 years a huge increase in the number of grandparents who are looking after children, because usually the daughter who is born the child is addicted to heroin or is unable, in and out of treatment, is unable to do that, and they don't want the child to want to care. In your research, have you come across an increase in the numbers of people? But first, alcoholism or addiction is rarely treated as a disability, and it's more a social stigma, it's more a moral wrong, and there's very little focus on involving families in treatment. But have you come across an increase in the numbers of families dealing with this area of problems arising?
I mean, we wouldn't have that kind of, we wouldn't have that kind of data, but I take on board the point you're making, because I've run across various situations myself in recent years where it is kind of the grandmother, actually one case I'm thinking of, the grandmother had a fall, she had and then had severe brain damage. She then, she had been caring for a child because the mother couldn't take over care, and the whole thing just turned, and the relatives, the whole thing just turned into a complete mess. So I mean, I think I understand the situation you're talking about, but it wouldn't have kind of been in our sort of data.
We do ask people who said they are caring for somebody why they're doing, what are the reasons, but it's very, very broad. It's basically an illness or a physical disability or a learned disability, whatever, but that's as far as it goes. So we don't go down to that level of detail, and also because it is just a sample I said at the start, there was also the need for more research into this and perhaps of a more qualitative nature, and that is something that obviously would come out in that kind of research, but wouldn't necessarily in the within the
Honestly,
example we
it
have.
was the answer I sort of expected.
Yeah.
It was more to raise the issue.
Mhm.
That you have a situation where there's a hidden population because the stigma is so
Yeah.
strong that that services don't hear them, won't see them, and they themselves are embarrassed and prejudiced against when they see services.
I mean, I think even what you're raising is actually a very important point because, you know, the sorts of things I'm thinking in terms of housing trends, employment trends, social policy, they're the kind of trends that we're used to throwing around. But quite clearly there are a whole lot of things going on in our society below the radar. And I think, for example, 3 suicides at the high school in Portadown, I mean, you just have no idea what is going on there, but there's clearly something very serious and something very disturbing and something, just a culture or something is happening down there that we don't know about. So I think it's a fair point that there is stuff below the radar.
Okay, so time for one last question then. Yeah.
I just wondered if the stats showed anybody that was needing care who was a carer. Is it possible to elicit any crossover or joint? Somebody who has both needs and a resource?
Yeah, the only thing that we did ask people about do they have a long-term limiting illness or disability, and did that affect their daily life? So we could maybe use that as an indicator, but that's not the same. And it also doesn't actually necessarily mean that they feel that they need care either. So it's too broad a question really. We could do it a little bit, but not.
I think we'd have to go like this almost from the other end, as in what we did a few years ago, where we actually sort of looked at things like how sane they were, how much care they needed, and what they got and where they got it from. We've actually got to go at it from the other end of the thing altogether, I think.
Yeah, this module of questions is very much about people who provided care, not, as Eileen says, from the other direction. So it was something else. So I think we'll call it there. Hopefully there'll be lunch outside. I've said that before and there wasn't, but hopefully there will be. So I just wanted to make a few things. Firstly, all the results are up available on the website. So if you want to go and explore the other questions we asked, both within the informal caring module and also within the range of other questions that we asked, it should all be available on the website today. Those of you who don't know, we also within ARK have an annual series of seminars. A lot of those focus on analysis of life and times data as well, and the new series will be coming on board in October this year, and there will be more information on the ARK website as well about that. So there's also an evaluation form in your pack, hopefully, that you can look at away without doing some work, and there will be a box just outside the door if you can leave that in. And so I just want to thank Eileen again for all the work that she has done with us, and thank you for your attention.